Hey everyone! In the last episode, I finally combined 100 versions of Uno into one game, but it took me 10 episodes to do that. I thought it would be a good idea to get a head start on the road to 200 Uno versions in this episode by adding 30 unique versions right now. The amalgam must grow, my fellow amalgamates, and you won't want to miss the new crazy mechanics added here. We have a lot to discuss, so I'll just jump right into that special time of the video. It's clarification time, with a real emphasis on the word time because we're going to talk about the hurry up timer mechanic again. Despite me talking about this for several minutes in the last video, some of you are still convinced the hurry up mechanic can be easily implemented into the amalgam. So allow me to talk for several more minutes about why this mechanic does not work. Here's a bullet point list of all of the things I talked about in the last video that make the hurry up card difficult to add. 1. The price of a digital timer. 2. The unfairness of a player managing the timer. 3. Sand timers cannot represent this mechanic. 4. Cards with one or more effects will take longer than 3 seconds to resolve. Additionally, I would like to add that 5. The mechanic must stay true to its original intention. If you want to try and come up with a way to add this mechanic, it needs to address all of these. Also, about the last one, I suppose I should describe what the original intention of the hurry up card was. To put it simply, it's a time crunch. Your turn can only be 3 seconds long. If it takes longer, you draw cards and skip your turn instead. To be clear, you're supposed to only have 3 seconds to choose a card, play it, and resolve its effects, which is done by the digital computer instantly in the case of Ubisoft Uno. You have to do all of this before it's the next player's turn. You're meant to feel pressured and stressed, and you're not meant to have any more than 3 seconds to take your turn. Got it? Good. Firstly, I just want to say that I'm not afraid to make this game more expensive by adding a digital timer. I just think that $5 to $10 is a lot for maybe 3 single-use mechanics, especially when you consider that the cards are worth less than a penny each. I will add a timer and other expensive components if I have to, but don't you want this behemoth of a game to be affordable? I do. That being said, a lot of you suggested I don't include a digital timer in the box, while including the timer mechanic, and that players could simply use timers built into their phones to execute the mechanic instead. I mean, look, I understand that almost everyone has a phone these days, but as a game designer, I can't expect people to provide a crucial game component themselves. All of the food mechanics are going to be functional with or without the food items, by the way, if you were wondering. I'm not EA. I'm not going to expect people to pay extra just so they can experience the full game. Anyway, even if I did do this, this does not make the mechanic viable because someone would still have to manage the digital timer, putting them at an unfair disadvantage when their turn comes around. In fact, no matter what, if the timer you're using requires human input in any sense, the player would have to operate it and therefore be at a distinct disadvantage. This includes sand timers. Despite me specifically mentioning that sand timers would not work, some of you are still convinced they could. If you can honestly find a manufacturer that can cheaply mass-produce sand timers that only last for 3 seconds, I would be truly surprised. The fact of the matter is that 99.9% of sand timers in existence either run for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. Both of which would not function for a 3-second mechanic for what should be obvious reasons. And even if I did use the non-existent 3-second sand timer for this mechanic, that one sand timer would only be useful for this one card face in a deck with nearly 1,200 some possibilities. And this would mean I would need to include a different sand timer for every other differently timed timer mechanic. And at that point, it's like, why not just use a digital timer? But either way, someone is going to have to unfairly operate the timer, putting them at a disadvantage. Another common comment I saw said something like, why not just develop a companion app or website that has a timer that automatically loops after 3 seconds have passed, so players don't have to operate it? For one, I don't know how to program like that, and I can't afford to pay anyone who does. For 2, let's say you do have an automatically looping timer for the sake of example. What do you do when the effects on someone's card take longer than 3 seconds to execute? The majority of the cards in this game have symbols and/or modifiers, and resolving even one of them will take longer than 3 seconds. So what, you're just going to unfairly punish nearly every player by forcing them to draw cards and skip their turn because they couldn't complete an impossible task? That doesn't sound very fun. A common alternative to this I saw was, you could just pause the timer whenever effects need to be resolved. But if this were the case, what would even be the point of having the timer at all? The player resolving effects would be able to take their time and resolve effects normally, while the next player in the turn order gets a ton of time to plan their next move, much longer than 3 seconds anyway. This defeats the entire intention of the mechanic, a stressful and thinking on your feet sequence, which simply would not be present 100% of the time this effect is active. And once again, someone is going to have to operate that timer. Another related suggestion would be having the player before the current player in the turn order operate the timer, and when the turn ends, the timer would be passed to the next player. This would mean the player operating the timer would never be at a disadvantage because it could never be their turn. Except that's wrong. I know it's been a while since we've talked about this, considering it was in the first episode, but remember the reverse? Or any other card that would shuffle or affect the turn order for that matter? Yeah, the solution isn't viable is what I'm saying. Now, I want to talk about the most common comment I saw in the last video. The idea here is that instead of using any sort of timer to count down from 3 seconds, instead, one or all players would verbally count down from 3 to execute this mechanic. I mean, on top of still suffering from the turns will take longer than 3 seconds thing, this solution is very susceptible to human error and bias. Even little counting tricks like the one Mississippi thing would be affected by this. There really isn't any way to standardize how long people will count for, and that will inherently make this mechanic unfair for literally everyone. Briefly, I'll just say I saw a few suggestions for this mechanic that sounded really cool, but didn't even resemble the original hurry-up mechanic, so save those ideas for custom wildcards. Speaking of those, if you still aren't convinced that this mechanic does not fit in the Amalgam, then just use a custom wildcard to add it. That's what the cards are for, after all. If you and your group can find a way to use this mechanic that you all deem fair and non-tedious, that's great. Just know that this mechanic is not making it into the official Chemicards box unless someone comes up with a solution that solves every problem I've described here. Clarification time over. Grab your remotes, everyone. We're gonna pull a Channel Chasers. Every single Uno version I'm talking about in this episode is TV related, and for the sake of not repeating myself, every card mentioned in this episode is getting a wild card slap. These versions are going to go by fast. It'll feel like a lightning round. Away we go. Edition 101 is Uno Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This one's unique wild card is the Wild Team Attack card. When you play this card, you get to discard up to 3 cards onto any discard pile without triggering effects in any order. But the cards you discard must contain a reverse, skip, or draw 2 symbol on them. Which do you value more, having less cards in your hand, or having more powerful cards in your hand? This card will test you. Up next is Edition 102, Uno Nickelodeon SpongeBob SquarePants. The special card being the Wild Jellyfishing card. This is effectively a cam, so I'll be changing it slightly. When you play this card, all players must publicly reveal any 9 number cards they have in their hand. If any player doesn't have any 9 number cards, they must draw 2 cards. Then everyone puts their cards back in their hand. I swear, the hand management in this game is going to be crazy. I need a large number for wars, and I need 1 of each color, and I need a 7 and a 9 in my hand at all times, but I can't have any red cards, and the more wild cards I have the better, and I need a way to defend myself, and Edition 103, Uno Nickelodeon SpongeBob SquarePants Special Edition 2002. This is another one of those tin box Uno versions, which is always fun to see. There were actually 3 versions of this tin box, but only one had a mechanic that's unique to the Amalgam: the Wild Super Absorbency card. When you play this card, the player with the fewest cards must draw 1 card from the hand of the player to their left, and then again from the player on their right, and then 1 more from the draw pile. If there's a tie for who has the fewest cards, the player playing the card gets to choose who the effect targets. I hope you aren't sick of SpongeBob yet, because there's more. Edition 104. Uno Nickelodeon SpongeBob SquarePants meme. Are these memes fire? Not really. But it's really funny that this deck is real to begin with. The unique wild card is confusingly named the Wild Draw 6. But that's literally not what it does, so I'll be calling it the Wild Draw 6 meme for now. When you play this card, choose a color. Then the next player must draw 6 cards. If any of the cards they draw match the color you chose, that player gets to discard all cards matching that color from their entire hand immediately. So yeah, very different from a normal draw 6. Up next we have Edition 105, Uno Rick and Morty, and this one adds an overpowered card, which is quite fitting considering it's Rick we're talking about here. The Wild Mr. Meeseeks card, when played, allows you to search any and all discard piles for 1 card. Once you choose a card, you get to play it immediately on any discard pile as an extra action. I'm sure you can imagine how busted this is and has the potential to be, so I'll let your mind wander. Edition 106, Uno Teen Titans Go. Ugh. Does anyone miss when kids' cartoons used to be about something? Anyway, the Wild Robin's Rule card exists. When you play this card, choose another player, and they get to discard all pink cards from their hand in any order without triggering effects, on top of the Robin's Rule card. So this card is not beneficial to you, and instead helps your opponents. How fittingly meaningless. Edition 107, Uno Dragon Ball Z. This is a very recent release to my understanding, and it includes yet another cam, and it will be slightly altered. The Wild Shenron's Wish card. When you play this card, draw the top card of the draw pile and place it face up on top of Shenron's Wish. If the card you drew has the number 0 within the number of the card or within the symbol artwork, you get to perform one of the following effects. 1. The next player draws 2. 2. Reverse. 3. Choose another player. They must skip their next turn. 4. Discard another card from your hand without triggering effects on top of the card you drew. You can tell when the card designers care more about the franchise they're making a card for, because the more they care, the longer the mechanic is. Edition 108, Uno Saved by the Bell. Unbelievably, because of this edition, the clothes you are wearing as you play will be part of the strategy. When you play the Wild Rad Style card, choose a color. Notably, this color does not have to be one of the 8 colors present in the Amalgam. Any players wearing any clothes that contain the color you chose must draw 2 cards from the draw pile. So I guess the strategy is to wear a morph suit of one uncommon clothing color like orange if you really want to try-hard it. Edition 109, Uno Friends. Once again, another cam. TV shows love those. Here's how I'll be adapting this one. The Wild The One Where You Draw card. When this card is played against you, roll the d6. If you roll anything other than a 6, draw a card. Continue to do this until you roll a 6. Dice really are the solution to the most difficult problems. Edition 110, Hanna-Barbera Uno. This one has a very powerful card, quite similar to the Mr. Meeseeks card. The Wild Picnic card. You can play this card at any time, even when it's not your turn, on any discard pile, and steal the card you just played it on top of. The card you steal gets added to your hand, and you can use it later normally. Afterwards, play resumes with whose turn it was, similar to the jump in rule. This card isn't even that good in the context of its own game, but in the Amalgam, this card is very, very scary. Up next is Edition 111, Uno Ultimate Spider-Man Web Warriors. As if we didn't have enough Spider-Man representation in the Amalgam already. The wild card is called the Wild Web Slinger card. When you play this card, you may choose to give away up to 3 cards of the same color to any player of your choice. You can even split the cards up so multiple players get a card or two, whatever combination you want. A way to get rid of cards is always nice, so I appreciate this one. Out of all of these, I didn't expect the next one to have a complex mechanic. Edition 112, Uno Hannah Montana. When you play the Wild On Tour card, lay your entire hand face up in front of you and then steal another player's entire hand. That other player now has a choice. They can either take your original hand, or they can take any other player's hand for themselves without knowing what they have. Once someone has their hand stolen, or if they've taken a new hand, their hand cannot be stolen again. This cycle continues until someone takes your original hand that you placed face up, or everyone has been stolen from, forcing the last player to take your original hand. I really like cards that provide opportunities for players to use more in-depth strategy, and this is one of those cards, so once again, I enjoy this one. Okay, try not to get deja vu because edition 113 is Uno Hannah Montana. Same exact name as the last one. I kid you not, both this and the last version I talked about came out in 2007, so I can't even differentiate them by year. In the rules doc, I'm literally going to write Uno Hannah Montana twice just to confuse people who haven't watched this episode. Luckily, this version has a mechanic that's different from the previous one. The Wild Best of Both Worlds card has 2 possible effects, and when you play this card, you get to choose which one activates. The first one is effectively an all-draw 1, so yeah, you play it and everyone draws 1 except you. The second one is a draw 4 nullifier. If a draw 4 specifically is played against you, you can play this card as an extra action out of turn if necessary to nullify the draw 4. Haha, I get it. Best of both worlds? 2 effects? Are you laughing?
You better be.
Oh boy, insert repetition joke here, because edition 114 is Uno Spin Hannah Montana. To put it simply, this is very similar to Uno Spin, except a few of the wheel effects are changed to fit the Hannah Montana theme. Because it's so similar, I'm going to choose not to make it a modifier like the original Uno Spin, and instead the Hannah Montana spin will be placed on a wild card. The swirly modifier already shows up 25 times anyway. Get out your d8s because when you play this card, the next player must roll the d8 and perform the corresponding effect. Here are the 8 possible effects. 1. Almost Uno. 2. Discard color. 3. Discard number. 4. Draw star. This is a new one. You just have to draw until you get a 6, 7, 8, or 9 number card. 5 is show hand. 6. The on tour symbol makes a triumphant return here, even though it's called World Tour in this version, it functions exactly the same. 7 is all draw 2, so everyone draws 2 except for you. 8 is interesting. We have a variant of the Uno Spin shouting mechanic called the Sweet Niblets card. This really just reminds me of that one scene in Toy Story where Buzz goes insane because I've never seen Hannah Montana. When this is rolled, all players must race to say Sweet Niblets, and the first player to do this gets to play a card as an extra action, and then play resumes with them as well. Okay, I think that's all things Hannah Montana that I need to cover. I don't need any more. Up next, we have Edition 115, Uno The Big Bang Theory. I've noticed a slight trend with some Uno versions. If the card mechanic designer doesn't know what to do, they'll often just make a card art mechanic, because that's the easiest way to implement a mechanic that relates to the franchise they're representing. This applies here. The unique card of this version is the Big Bang Theory Kitty card. When this card is played against you, you must draw cards until you get a 0, 3, 5, or 9 number card. That's all. I think Mattel should hire me because I literally know nothing about the Big Bang Theory, and I think I could do better than this. Doesn't the very concept, the very aura of a Bazinga card seem more chaotic and appealing than this? Edition 116, Uno One Piece 2003. unbelievably, this version has 2 unique cards instead of just 1. The first one is called the Shanks card. When you play this card, choose a color and a player. That player must privately show you any cards in their hand that match the color you chose. This effect can be nullified by the other player if they choose to play a 1-number card out of turn as an extra action. Another strategic card. The next one is the Uno no Mi card. Before you play this card, play an additional card as an extra action, then play this card to duplicate all of the effects on the card you played previously. This is very similar to the little help card from the last episode, except it's even better because you get to play an extra card. I think now is a good time to mention that some people were asking what happens when a card effect is duplicated, but something is limiting the effect. A good example would be if you duplicated the effect of the Wild Just Dance Machine card, what would happen? There are only 16 experiment cards, and they've already been given to all of the players. If you duplicate the effect, there would be none to give away. Here's the part of the video where I say, check the rules document. There's a chance your question is answered there. In this case, there's a general rule I added recently, which states, if an effect is not physically possible, the effect is nullified. So always double check before you duplicate. Edition 117, Uno Doctor Who. Don't let this image fool you, this version does not contain a bug shaped like a Dalek. It's actually just a glorified Uno card carrying case. Still, only one mechanic to talk about here, the Wild Exterminate card. When you play this card, the player with the fewest cards must draw 4. Ouch. I feel like it would be funny if you had to say exterminate in a Dalek voice when you played this card, but accuracy is more important here. Edition 118, Uno Spy Family. A very recent version, as you can imagine. When you play the Bond's Future Prediction card, choose a color. Then all other players must publicly reveal a card of that color. If someone doesn't have a card of that color, that player draws 3. Aw, thank you, Bond. Edition 119, Uno Glee. When you play the Wild Sabotage card, you get to privately view an opponent's hand. Next, you may choose to swap a card from your hand with a card from theirs. A simple card, but quite powerful. Edition 120 is a spin-off of a spin-off, because this is Uno Flip Stranger Things. Lucky me, this version has 2 unique mechanics, and one of them is a lame cam that I don't have to touch. I can represent this version just fine with the Wild Jim Hopper card. When you play this card, the player with the most cards gets to discard half of their entire hand. If they have an odd number of cards, they get to discard the larger amount. Thank you, Jim Hopper. Is this mechanic at all relevant to Stranger Things? Edition 121, Uno Craps Creek. This one contains yet another cam, but this one can be implemented in a much more interesting way, so here's my solution to this one. When you play the Wild Where Everyone Fits In card, choose either Flex or Non-Flex. All other players must look through their hand to see if they have more Flex cards or Non-Flex cards. Just as a reminder, 50% of the deck is made up of Flex cards. If you chose Flex and a player has more Flex cards in their hand than non-Flex cards, they're safe, but if they don't, they must draw 3. The same is true if you choose non-Flex and the other player has more Flex. You get it, right? If a player has the same amount of Flex and non-Flex cards, they're safe from both sides. Edition 122, Uno Ted Lasso. I realize there are a lot of shows represented in this episode that I've never watched, but I think it makes the name of the Wild Roy Kent Grunt card a lot funnier. When you play this card, challenge another player to a staring contest. Once the contest has begun, you must both attempt to do your best Roy Kent Grunt, whatever that means. Repeatedly do this until someone either loses the staring contest or breaks character. The loser draws 2 cards. I enjoy the strangeness of this mechanic. It's so much better than the typical cam. Edition 123, Uno Yellowstone. It's a cam. Surprise. Time to alter it slightly. When you play the Wild Yellowstone brand symbol, if any other player is not holding a yellow card, that player must draw 2. Simple as that. Nothing too fancy. Next is Edition 124, Uno DC Superhero Girls. The Wild Save the Day card is a card that hurts nobody and helps only one of your opponents. When you play this card, choose another player. That player cannot be affected by negative effects unless another wild card is played by any player. You know, now that I think about it, cards like this would be really good for the 2-player team mode I added in the last episode. Huh. Cool. Except for the fact that that makes the Robin's Rule card viable. Ugh. Okay, so Edition 125 is not a specific show, but instead an entire genre of TV. Uno Shark Week. When you play this card, put your hand on top of it by slapping it. All other players must then race to slap any discard pile. The last player to do this draws 4. Similar to the slap card, but having the freedom to slap any discard pile is an interesting differentiation. Edition 126, Uno Masters of the Universe. To put it simply, the Wild Power of Grayskull card is an all-draw 3. But when you're about to play this card, you must triumphantly raise the card above your head and proclaim, "By the power of Grayskull, I have the power!" And you already know I love cards that make you do stupid stuff when you play them, so this is an excellent addition. Edition 127, Uno the Muppet Show. Yet another card that has absolutely nothing to do with the source material. The Wild Mayhem card, when played, forces all players to give their entire hand to the player on their left or the player on their right. The direction your cards are passed is determined by the player who played the card. This is a twist on other similar symbols with more strategy involved, which is always nice. Edition 128, Uno Nickelodeon. This is an older one. It's always surprising to me when older versions of Uno have unique mechanics, because the general trend is the older a version of Uno is, the less likely it is to have a unique mechanic. This one has the Wild Trade Places card. When you play this card, choose another player, then swap places and your entire hand with theirs at the same time. Do not underestimate the power of this card, it is deceptively good. If someone after you in the turn order has Uno and you play this card to swap with them, you can basically get a guaranteed win. Edition 129, Uno A Charlie Brown Christmas. You're joking, right? Out of all of the things to receive a version of Uno, including The Office, I feel like this is one of the least deserving. Yes, I dislike this Christmas special, and apparently that's a hot take, but I just think the majority of the other Christmas specials that air around Christmas time are better and more interesting. Year Without a Santa Claus is the best one, and you know why. Anyway, this version actually got released 3 separate times, and it didn't change anything for any of its re-releases. The Happy Holiday card is an all-draw 1 with a twist. All other players must draw 1 when this is played, then you choose a color. If any player drew a card that matches the color you chose, they get to discard it without triggering effects onto the pile the Happy Holiday card got played on immediately. Last but certainly not least, we have Edition 130, Uno Seinfeld. This is the perfect example of someone caring about the source material. This one card, the Wild Seinfeld episode card, has so much packed into it. Basically, at the start of the game, all players must unanimously agree on which of the 8 possible effects this card can have during the game. From that point on, whenever you play this card, it has the chosen effect. Here are the 8 effects your group can choose from. 1. Serenity Now. When you play this card, all players must race to say Serenity Now. The last player to do this draws 4 cards. 2. Festivus Feats of Strength. When this card is played against you, you must either do 10 push-ups or draw 4 cards. 3. Elaine Dance. When you play this card, choose a player. That player must do their best Elaine Dance. If they refuse to do the dance, they must draw 4. 4. Jimmy. When this card is played, all other players must refer to themselves in the third person. This continues until another wild card is played. Whenever a player is asked a question, they must answer. If anyone accidentally refers to themselves in the first person while this effect is active, they must draw 2 cards for each instance. 5. Yada Yada. When you play this card, you must tell a quick story about literally any subject, but the story must end with the phrase yada yada, so I discarded 2 cards. As long as the story ends with that phrase, the player gets to discard 2 cards onto any discard pile without triggering effects once the story concludes. 6. No Uno for you. If anyone calls Uno and they only have 1 card in their hand, you can play this card out of turn if necessary, and this forces the player who called Uno to immediately draw 4. 7. It's not you, it's me. If a player plays any action card against you, you can choose to play this card. This forces the player that played the action card to suffer all of its effects instead. Then play resumes with you, not whoever's turn it may have been. 8. Can you spare a square? The final possible effect of this card. When you play this card, choose a card from your hand and give it to any player of your choice. Whew! I'm out of breath, honestly. I'm not used to talking about that many versions of Uno in one sitting. A lot of you have been asking how much real progress I've made with this project. And I've answered this before, but I don't know. At least not exactly. It's hard to know if Google's word can be taken seriously considering all of the suggestions you all have thrown my way, but let's say there's approximately 644 versions of Uno for the sake of argument. If you count every version I've covered so far, and a list of versions I've been slowly accumulating that I know have nothing new in them, we can estimate that Chemicards is approximately 36% complete as far as the actual combining aspect goes. Don't be deceived, that is a really big number in the grand scheme of things. Most people would consider what I'm doing an impossible task, and that's probably why it's never been done. I will continue to prove that this is indeed very possible by continuing this series. And hopefully once the final combination is complete, it won't be that much more work to actually complete the physical game. As you've probably noticed, I've been making the effect symbols as I go, which is most definitely the largest chunk of the work that will be put into making the physical aspect of this game. So in the end, I'll just have to make the card art borders, box art, instruction manual, website, do a bit of balancing, and boom, the game will be ready for request. I say this like it will be easy, but we still have a lot of work to do before that point. As always, be sure to let me know of any Uno versions I haven't covered yet. The list of what I've already covered is in the rules doc, link in the description. I feel like it goes without saying that the longer this series goes on, the more obscure the Uno versions will become, so be sure to stick around if you want to see those. It is once again thank you time. A very special thank you goes out to Starbright575, Sanix 900, Crystal Burger, Skyroll of the Stars, Cat Herder Cam, Omicromium, Fallen Angel Viox, and Agnor99. As always, your donations are very much appreciated, and I hope the videos I'm making are worth the money you are willing to give. And now it is once again time to end the video. Please, please, please subscribe if you enjoy the stuff I'm willing to do, and like the video if you in fact liked the video. Have a fantastic insert time of day here, and I'll see you in the next one.